We're going to be joined by Reb Bradley. He is the author of Born Liberal, Raised Right, How to Rescue America from Moral Decline, One Family at a Time. He is also a radio counselor. I don't know what that is. A talk show host, a writer, and a national conference speaker. Fascinating. Reb, welcome to the Young Turks, first of all. Pleasure to have you here.
Well, thank you.
All right. Now, let me understand what you mean by we are born liberal and that is our problem.
Well, my contention is, my concern, maybe I could back up a little. I'm talking about morally liberal. And based on the definition of the word liberal, means be loosed from moorings, not having a moral anchor, you might say. And so...
Yeah, I would dispute that definition.
Well, I'm just saying, taking it at the face value of the word. But
That's
either way, my concern came about, I teach, I write books on parenting, and I do seminars on parenting, and so when somebody comes to me for help to assess with their kids, how their kids are behaving, it's like a doctor. You diagnose the condition, you say, well, here's some of the root causes, it might be it. And so I, about 10 years ago, began to do this with Culture Society. I noticed the violent crime rate was up more than 300% since, the early 60s. And aggravated assault, I think, was 329%. That's illegal drug use up 400%. SAT scores have dropped more than 60 points, and our families, our individuals, our culture is struggling, and so I just apply the same principles of evaluation to our culture and say, where does this come from? In other words, if too many people are stealing, how can we change that? Do we need better laws? If too many people are murdering others, do we need more gun control? In other words, what will solve this? And my contention was, I went back to the basics and said, you know what? It's parenting. It began to change in the 50s and 60s. And so that's the premise of the book, that America can be rescued if we get a grasp on the natural leanings of human nature, and we help parents understand how to rear their children.
All right, I want to get into what your view of the natural state of human beings are in a second, but first problem I spot here, Reb, is that and there's two problems, I think, in what you just said. One is that you've defined liberals or liberalism just on a moral level, if not a political level, as not having a moral anchor. If I define conservatism as being a hypocritical blowhard, then I could say, yes, conservatism has caused all the problems in America. But you see, it's in the definition. So if you define it as something bad, then it's easy to make fun of it. But don't you see how that definition might not really be productive?
Well, I feel it's accurate when I look at, because I read through, I think it was at least a dozen dictionaries to try to determine what were the most concise, simple definitions of liberalism. And that's what I saw.
No, there are definitions that say that it is people who believe in progress and being inclusive and believing in freedom and liberty, etc. And you happen to take the one that I don't even know where you got it from. I have never seen that in a dictionary, but that you didn't find to be pleasant. But that's okay. Let's move on to problem number two, which is that you say, look, crime has gone up, so it must be a problem in society, and it must be the liberals. Or morally speaking, not necessarily, again, political, because you did make that clarification. But crime went down in the 1990s when Bill Clinton was in charge. It went back up during the Bush era. It went up during the 1980s when Ronald Reagan was in charge. Do you think Ronald Reagan encouraged people to raise children in a more liberal fashion, but then Bill Clinton was more conservative, and then George W. Bush was more liberal?
No, actually, 1991 was the year that it began to drop, but it's only dropped slightly. It's still up more than 300% in violent crimes. I mean, sexual assault, if I recall, is 318%, higher than it was in 1960. This tells me that we have a real issue, a problem of self-control, that children are no longer raised with self-control. See, somebody with self-control doesn't rape, doesn't steal, doesn't use drugs, because they can say no to themselves, and they can say no to their passions, the part of them. Someone who's never raised with self-control won't be able to do that. They will have a covetous heart. The heart of man, humans haven't changed, but the ability to control oneself, that has changed dramatically in the last 40 years.
So you are saying then that in the 1990s we were a lot more self-controlled, and that we
No,
because crime went down significantly in the 1990s.
No, actually only marginally. If I look at the chart, it peaked in 1991 and then began to drop, but it's still, even though it dropped somewhat, and I don't know what...
What did it drop from 1991 to 2001?
You know, I don't recall what it was in 91.
Okay.
That was part of my research for the book, but I don't remember what that was.
Right. Hey, Reb, did you consider that it's a matter of reporting? Because I've taken classes in criminology, and what they said is that in the modern era, crime statistics have gone up because the reporting of crime has gone up significantly. So if you looked at it from the 1920s to the 1960s, crime has also gone up significantly, but that's partly because they had very bad reporting for crime in the 1920s.
Well, if you think that's all the issue is reporting...
I'm not saying that's all it is, but that is a large chunk. Have you considered that and written about it in your book?
Well, I didn't bother to write about it, but I certainly had to consider it. But the other factors is overwhelming. Anecdotally, my experience has been, in other words, we're not just talking about one kind of crime. We're talking about classrooms. We're talking about a complete structure change within classrooms. We're talking about types of crimes, students shooting up their campuses. I think for the book I documented more than 30 episodes since the 70s of young people who shot up their campuses.
So let me break it down, because you're now mentioning specific things. Columbine is a decent example, but let's go to Timothy McVeigh, which is also a pretty decent example. Are you saying he was raised in a permissive atmosphere where he was allowed to believe in right-wing ideology and that fostered itself into terrible violence?
Well, I don't know his childhood, and I don't know what the effects were in his life, but my premise is not that every conservative raises a conservative child and every liberal raises a liberal child. My point is, whether you're conservative or liberal, you will likely raise a child who's liberal in their moorings, who is morally liberal, if you are not careful, if you do not understand how to rear your children with self-control. And so Timothy McVeigh, I would say, he obviously showed a tremendously morally liberal streak by his violence and by his murderous ways.
But Reb Kennedy, so we're talking to Reb Bradley, and he's the author of Born Liberal, Raised Right, How to Rescue America from Moral Decline, One Family at a Time. Reb, can you not see that your whole thing is built on the definition? You define liberals as people who are of loose morals, and then you say, well, anybody who has loose morals must be a liberal, and then that's why we have the problem, because of liberals. I mean, it's so circular, it's mind-bending.
Well, once again, well, you know what, I'll take you back to how I first came up with this notion to even write the book. I was listening to a radio station, and the talk show host was listing off traits of what he called liberals.
Can I guess who that person was? Was it Rush Limbaugh?
Yeah, it happened to be him that day.
Interesting. Okay.
So I was listening to him, and although it wasn't my habit at the time to listen to him, I happened to be listening that day. And as I was listening, I thought, that's interesting. Everything he's listing off is like it's taken from my child training book, and he's listing off the traits. They were matched exactly of poorly trained children and their parents. And I thought, wouldn't that be interesting, as if a child is not trained properly, that he would go up liberal in his outlook and liberal in his view.
No,
and maybe it would affect how he votes. And that's when I began to research this and became confident that how we are raised, the worldview we receive when we're from infancy, determines our politics and our morals. For example, if a child is raised that every time he breaks through into his parents will pay for it, they pay for his parking tickets that he incurs, or they clean his room, and in other words, they don't let him live the consequences of his actions. His bike is stolen because his dad says don't leave it in the yard, it'll be stolen, but he does, so dad buys another bike. He'll grow up with a perspective that he should not have to live with the consequences of his actions.
You know, Reb, as you mentioned that, the picture in my mind is so obvious. George W. Bush, a kid who never had to deal with the consequences of his decisions, failure after failure, and his poppy comes in and bails him out, and they thought they raised a real conservative. So what happened there, Reb?
You're saying, why didn't they? Well,
you saying so George W. Bush was a liberal, raised as a liberal by George H.W. Bush?
Yeah, I don't know the facts on that, but let's say we're talking hypothetically here. Well, that's exactly the point of my book, that somebody may maintain the label of conservative, and yet if they're raised with what I will call a liberal outlook, then they'll join a Republican Party perhaps, and they will wear the label conservative, but yet they will cluelessly behave liberally in some areas.
All right, Rev, I can't believe I'm going to proceed further, but let me do one more here specific example. The guys who attacked us on 9/11 thought they were and look, you got to give them this, they were disciplined, they were not, quote-unquote, morally loose, whether it was with women or alcohol or anything like that. They were very strict upbringing and strictly religious. And then they ran planes into buildings full of innocent civilians. How does that jibe with your theory?
Well, I believe they were people that I would say were raised morally liberal.
Oh, come on, Rev.
Well,
I mean, even you can't believe that.
Would you like me to define it?
Yes, go ahead.
I'm saying that to be morally liberal means to be ruled by your passions. I'm saying that a person, they were driven by their passion, even though it was their passion for the religion, their passion to have 70 virgin maidens waiting them in heaven, that their passions drove them to do that. I'm saying that somebody who has self-control, who can say no to their passions, wouldn't feel compelled to do that.
Reb, do you get that you're defining liberal as people who are dolts, who have no self-control, and are just guided by their passions, and hence have you created a straw man that's so easy to knock down? But in fact, what you're doing is actually fairly offensive to over 50% of the population, as you're calling them people who just have no social and moral bearings and don't know what's happening, and they're like, oh my God, where's my passion and emotion, and I'm going to go in that direction. Do you understand that is both circular and offensive?
Well, I know it would be offensive, but I don't consider it circular. In fact, I think I'd love to talk. You're going to have to read my book so you could actually work through my reasoning and my explanation.
No, but I have. You've explained it here, and it keeps going in a circle. Liberals are bad people, hence all the bad people are liberals.
I define liberalism as being morally without restraint, and that some liberals, quote-unquote, who wear the label, might have conservative traits.
Okay. All right, Rev, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to write a book where I say all conservatives are heartless, cruel sons of bitches, right? And look, that's what they are. And so all cruel, heartless sons of bitches are conservatives. See, I proved my case. You see it?
I understand what you're saying, and I see how you're saying it. So I'd like to clarify one more attempt. I'm not saying that among liberals that they're all without discipline. This world would be of self-discipline. There are no disciplined individuals. We would be in anarchy if that were the case. I'm saying that generally, the liberal worldview is rooted in self-indulgence, and therefore, individuals without self-control develop a morally liberal worldview and are drawn to liberal political parties and perspectives.
Yeah, that's absolutely ridiculous. Reb, let me ask you this final line of questioning here. And we're talking to Reb Bradley, and his book is Born Liberal, Raised Right. You know, I'm sure a lot of people are interested, and we got a lot of conservatives that listen to our show, so if you're interested, please check that out. Born Liberal, Raised Right. Reb, do you know any liberals? Because, for example, I'm a liberal, right? I'm very disciplined. I work 18 hours a day, okay? I put off, self-gratification in the short term. I went to some decent schools, and I work towards a better future. And liberals, in reality, seek to work with one another and expand freedom for people, right? That is my view of liberals, and that's the views I've seen. Do you know any liberals? Like, are you friends with any liberals?
Well,
you think,
sure,
I'm friends with this guy, but boy, is he morally permissive, and he's going to lead to crime for his children. I mean, is that how it plays out for you with you and your liberal friends?
Well, I have friends. I have relatives who are liberal. I can't even begin to explain the quantity of them. But my point is, many, like yourself, I believe that. Self-discipline is not the issue as far as doing is right. But what I'm saying is that the human nature that's driven towards gratification is affected by, how can I say this? Back up a little. Because I'm trying to explain too much at once here, so forgive me. I'm not saying that there are no disciplined individuals, that it's impossible. I'm just saying that if, in fact, parents fail to give their children self-control when they're young, in many areas, those individuals will grow up and will be drawn towards what I will call liberal causes, liberal perspectives, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
and in the book I documented, and that's why I would love you to hear your responses to the things I document in the book.
Right. I think that is absolutely, positively not true. If you're saying that people that seek immediate gratification and don't care about other people and have loose morals are bad people, well, that's obvious. Okay. If you're saying they're all liberals, then that's flat out wrong. And deeply offensive to about 60% of the country, because, well, I wouldn't say 60, but at least 53% of the country. But we've gone around in this circle, and we have a disagreement on what you think liberals are, and people can check out your book to see if you're right or wrong in how you reason it out in the book, and the book is Born Liberal, Raised Right. And I would just, as we part here, Reb, I would encourage you to meet more liberals, to get their real perspective. I doubt that any of them would ever say to you, oh, I'm a liberal because I don't really believe in morals, or that I have, I'm not a moral, I don't have a moral anchor.
None of them would. I don't think most people know what really drives them.
Okay. Yeah, I know. The liberals are also foolish on top, so they don't really know what's going on.
I don't know. I think all of us as humans hardly know what drives us.
All right, fair enough. But if you're interested, Rev Bradley's book, again, is Born Liberal, Raised Right. Thanks for being on, Rev. We appreciate it.